Hello, Dr. Baker. Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, good morning to you. Well, I guess it's probably more afternoon, evening for you, but I'm doing well. So
Yes, it's 8:30 p.m. right now.
okay. Yeah, well, it's about 8 a.m. here. So interesting.
Yes.
You're
So,
in Mumbai, or where are you?
yes, I'm in Mumbai right now. Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, awesome. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for taking time and addressing us here. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to our viewers. So, today we have Dr. Shawn Baker, and he's an orthopedic surgeon. He served in the U.S. Air Force, I believe. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's the author of the book The Carnivore Diet, and he is the CEO of Meat RX Official. So thank you so much, Dr. Baker, for taking time and coming live on this podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to be able to talk to folks from different parts of the world. Obviously, you're in a very big country over there in India, a lot of people there. So it's good to get the message.
1.3 billion.
I know. Yeah, I guess you guys will be the biggest country in the world in about 10 years. According to projections, I think you'll pass China. So.
Oh, yes, for sure. And Dr. Baker, before we begin, there's something really funny that happened. I sent our banner to about a couple of hundred friends of mine on WhatsApp. And I kid you not, two of them replied at the same time and thought that I had John Cena over. So they thought you were John Cena, and until they read your name, and then I told them what was going on. So anyway, let's before we begin the show. So when it comes to dieting, I feel that there are two extremes of a spectrum. One is veganism, and then the other is going hardcore carnivore like yourself. So here we are, not to argue or debate about anything, but because this concept is so new to India, I really wanted you to take out time and come here and address us to educate us on how to go about this concept. So Dr.
Sure.
Baker, when did you first come across the idea of following the purely carnivore diet, and how do you manage it into your lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, my first exposure to it was probably about 5 years ago. I've adopted it just under 4 years. So I kind of started looking into this, as I was kind of progressing through, my own sort of health journey and trying different diets and different strategies. At that time, I was pursuing a low carb and a ketogenic diet. And I kind of just saw a group of people pursuing a kind of a fully meat-based diet, and we're doing really well. And so I, just thought I would just try it as kind of an experiment, and I was really amazed by how much better my health got. And I did it for about a month, and went back to a more omnivorous diet, and I just frankly didn't feel as good. And so I decided that all things being equal and understanding a little bit about nutrition and some of the flaws and problems with nutrition science, and that we really don't know as much as we think we do. I went back to the option of just pursuing a meat-based diet, and I've been there for, like I said, getting close to 4 years now. So that was kind of my introduction to the diet. And how do I implement? I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, I just eat a lot of meat most days, and that's mostly it. I include some eggs. Occasionally I'll put a little dairy in there and seafood, and occasionally I'll have maybe a little bit of organ meat in there, but not that frequently. And it's actually pretty easy to do here. I know there's some constraints where you are, particularly around beef consumption, but I mean, certainly in India, I know lamb and chicken and fish, and I maybe even water buffalo. I can't remember if that's allowed or not, but I know that the beef cattle are off limits for many people based on, kind of religious prohibitions. But and I'm aware of actually quite a few people in India that are actually doing this, that have reached out to me, and I've talked to, and many of them are on our meatrx.com platform, and we love supporting people of all parts of the world and all backgrounds. So it's definitely doable.
Oh, that's great. And do you think that including a lot of meat in your lifestyle is a little more expensive as compared to going vegetarian, or a mix of both?
Well, it certainly could be and can be, but you can certainly, and again, every country has a little bit different in what's available and what the costs are. But here in the United States, meat is relatively inexpensive, and certainly if you wanted to go with things like, ground beef or ground lamb, or some of those things. You can do it fairly inexpensive. You actually end up eating less total food. The volume of food you eat is less. You don't waste as much. You don't require, supplementation. There's a lot of things you just don't need that makes the average person end up actually, it tends to be, for most people here in the US, it's generally pretty comparable. We find that once you do it long enough, you don't waste any food. There's nothing that goes in the trash can. I remember buying lots of fruits and vegetables and organic fruits and vegetables, and often it would end up going bad, and you end up throwing away, or there'd be a lot of waste, and we don't have that here with this diet. So, for instance, eggs are very inexpensive, and certainly they can be part of the diet, and a lot of people will do that. And I'm doing that. Quite frankly, quite recently, I've been including a lot more eggs in my diet, and so that, I can literally eat for, a couple dollars a day, so it is affordable here, and in many places. Now, again, where you're at, it might be more challenging. I'm not sure what the economics of meat are there in India, but I expect it's doable.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm aware that you're using a lot of eggs because you recently put up a recipe for the carnivore pudding, and there were a lot of eggs in that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a little controversial. People kind of, they want you to be in this sort of strict, dogmatic, zealot camp, because I put a little, because I'll put some spices on my food, and I'll put some seasoning for time. I've gone a long time just using salt, and that's fine too. But some people have a lot of sensitivities to certain spices and seasonings, and so they get some people upset about that. But really, the underlying goal that I have is just health, and I don't really, I tell people, do what's going to work for you. And for many people, it's for some people, like particularly people battling things like autoimmune disease or inflammatory, gut diseases, being very, very strict, excluding all sort of plant potentially irritants from the diet is what they need to do. But not everybody is in that situation. Some people can get away with, a little bit more variety, a little more spices, and some people include other foods that are plant-based, and I'm totally fine with that as long as it's working for you.
Okay. And if a newbie wants to start following the carnivore diet, what advice would you give to them? What are the do's and the don'ts?
Well, I think that the biggest don'ts are, don't let yourself get too hungry. I think any diet that you don't enjoy, any diet that makes you hungry all the time, you're just going to fail. You won't last over time. So I tell people in the beginning, particularly, some people will need to transition away from a higher fiber diet and a higher carbohydrate diet. So you might need a period of a couple, 3 or 4 weeks to kind of transition off of that. So that may be a wise approach for many people. Enjoy yourself, enjoy the food. If you need to use, in the beginning, if you need to spice up the meats and, use varieties and different types, eggs, fish, seafood, different types, whether it's if you're in India and you want to use lamb as a primary source of red meat. I do think red meat is an important part of it. So I think you should include that if at all possible. People ask me if they can do it all fish or all chicken, and I've not seen anybody do that very successfully over the long haul. So it seems like that's important. Getting enough fat in the diet is important, because if you are not taking in carbohydrates, then you're going to need some energy from somewhere. So typically that comes from dietary fat. And, you can utilize your own body fat for a period of time, but then as you get leaner and leaner, many people often do when they go carnivore, dietary fat becomes important. Dairy is one of those things. I know dairy is very popular in India. As you know, there's a large vegetarian population, or has been traditionally, and dairy's always been a part of that. Dairy for some people can be problematic. You just have to assess your own tolerance and see how you do with that. And I see a lot of people do better by limiting dairy, but it's one of those things where you have to kind of, figure it out for yourself. In the beginning, I tell people use a dairy, use the ghees and the cheeses and the things like that to make the diet more palatable. And then as you get into it a few months, you can kind of make an experiment to say maybe cutting back or eliminating the dairy for a few months might help solve a particular health issue. And I tell most people, if they're wanting to do this, it's usually maybe to lose some weight, or maybe there's people that are diabetic, they want to improve their blood sugar control, and this has been an excellent way to do that. Or any of these other problems. We see a lot of surprisingly benefits with regard to mental health. A lot of people that have depression, anxiety seem to improve as their blood glucose stabilizes, which it almost always tends to. And then as we get better nutrition, we have to realize that meat is highly nutritious. It's highly bioavailable. Particularly when we look at things like amino acids and essential fats, they're packaged in what we need and what we're made out of. And so that's the most efficient way to get those nutrients. Not that you can't get some of them from plants, but it's just a little more challenging. And a lot of people will find, I think particularly with the modern diet that has affected the entire world, including where you are, is kind of transitioned over to this highly industrialized diet where there's a lot of just, chemistry experiments instead of food that we're being asked to consume. And it's very often palatable. It's very cheap and cheaply made and highly profitable for the companies that like to sell it to us, but it's not very good for us.
Okay, that was pretty profound. And did you say, can anyone include a little bit of carbohydrate in the beginning and then eventually transition towards a pure meat diet? Or even when a person is an advanced carnivore diet practitioner, can they still have a little bit of carbohydrate in their food?
Again, that goes to individual tolerance. A lot of people suffer from, almost a food addiction where they just, they have a hard time getting rid of that. And so I think that's an important part of the beginning transition, is to really change relationship with food. And so instead of, the sweets and the sort of things like that everybody seems to think they always need, and eat, in large amounts, you have to get away from that. And it's not that you can never do that again, but I think you have to change the relationship. So instead of eating because you're bored, or you're eating because you're stressed out, or eating for social or pressure reasons, a lot of people, I know a lot of parts of the world, eating is a cultural and a social event, and that's fine. But at the same time, sometimes we eat in a way that's not good for our health. And so I think spending a period of time, if you have these problems where you're kind of quote unquote addicted to these types of food, it's kind of like an alcoholic or any other sort of person that's addicted to a substance. You can't quit that in moderation. It's really hard to tell an alcoholic to quit drinking alcohol and yet tell them to drink 2 or 3 drinks a week. It just doesn't work that way. So some people have to be strict and abstain from those things for a period of time until they change that relationship. And then, depending on how they're doing, they may be able to reintroduce a little bit, small amount. And I encourage people to try, once you've solved your health problems, once you've met your goal, maybe you've got your weight goal, maybe you've gotten to a healthy body weight again, you've maybe come off medications, then you can maybe add food back in. Maybe it's a little bit of fruit, maybe it's a little bit of, grain or starch or something you tolerate well, and be objective and assess assess objectively what it's actually doing to you.
Okay. And so since we already talked about milk products, but since they come from animals, are they counted as a part of carnivore diet?
Yeah, they certainly are. But again, I just urge people to be cautious with it, because many people, they do have issues with dairy products. And I again, particularly if weight loss is your goal, I'm not particularly a big fan of drinking your calories. So that would be, milk is obviously very easy to take a lot of calories in that way. And so, there's different tolerances for different types of dairy. Some people do better with harder cheeses. Some people do better with the ghees and the butters than they do with the larger doses of dairy, which would be, things like the milks and the yogurts and, I guess the kefirs, and I'm not sure what options you have all out there in India that might be a little different, but I think you get the point.
Yes. So since you're talking about it, ghee is actually from India, and I saw it on your page one day. I was really surprised because you use ghee to cook some meat.
Well, I used to cook, I think, eggs or fish or something like that, probably.
Yes. And it's been a part of the Indian diet from I think thousands of years, but I'm glad that it's spreading throughout the world, because I think in the English translation, it's clarified butter, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be pretty healthy.
Yeah, and I've had ghee, I've had dairy, ghee from cows and from goats and from yak even. So and I think I enjoy it. I think it's a good flavor. Unfortunately, I see a lot of the ghee in India is being replaced with things like I think palm oil and some of the other fats, and I think that is probably a net detriment. You probably do better going back to ghee in a more traditional sense. As you see that where you are, the rates are starting to climb pretty significantly, and I think to the recent change in diet, which would be kind of a more U.S. style diet, and we have a very poor diet here. So hopefully, it'd be better to see you guys change your diet back to what it was 50 years ago than adopt what you're doing now.
Yes, thanks. Thanks a lot for mentioning that. So people who are watching this can learn from it. And the carnivore diet, is it applicable to athletes as well? So endurance athletes, power athletes, or any athlete, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing more and more athletes, very high level athletes, professional NFL football players that have done this. I just interviewed a Super Bowl champion that, for you guys that are aware of, the American sports,
Yes.
The carnivore diet. I've seen several now top world-class rugby players that have been doing it. I've seen bodybuilders, powerlifters, CrossFit athletes, endurance athletes of various types. A person just completed a 100-mile run on a completely carnivorous diet with no added foods during the run, no sugar, no gels.
Wow.
18 hours for 100 miles, which is pretty impressive.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I've seen athletes of all types be successful with it. Sometimes it takes a while. I think athletes take a little bit longer to transition than the average person. I think it takes several months to maybe even 6 months to fully transition. But absolutely, there are athletes that do this very successfully.
Awesome. And I'm aware that you're a world record holder in brewing.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
So were you consuming the carnivore diet at that time?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was about 6 months after I switched over to carnivore. I I ended up breaking the world record over and over and over again, I think 10 times in the course of a couple of weeks. And then I ended up with 3 separate different world records in different categories, and then 6 American records, all done while I was on a carnivorous diet. And so, yeah, absolutely.
Wow. And so now let's talk about genetics a little bit. So as you already aware that India has more than 50% of the population that's vegetarian. And many of these individuals have been vegetarians for generations. Like my own family was a vegetarian from generations. I was raised vegetarian until the age of 16. And slowly I started eating eggs. And then I moved to the US to finish my education. And that's the time when I started eating meat. And I'm still eating meat. So it's a little tough for me to eat a lot of meat at once because of my genetics. I feel that. But what is your take on that? Does genetic composition affect your ability to digest and eat meat?
I don't know that it affects your ability to digest and eat meat from a genetic standpoint. I think that's probably a physiologic adaptation that occurs over years, and you may lose some capacity. If you're not used to eating something, you have to transition. It takes time. And so you have different different enzymes that are produced at different rates. We have different, like I said, our digestive system is very complicated, and there's lipases and proteases and bile salts and a number of things that are going to be and stomach acid and so on and so forth. So I think that, all human beings have had the capacity to digest and utilize meat as been part of the human diet. If we want to, use an evolutionary argument, for several million years, including people on the Indian subcontinent. People that originally inhabited that area were clearly meat eaters. As Homo erectus passed through India, they were killing, animals. And so, if you go far enough back into the history of all humans, we all were meat eaters at some point. I think as time has evolved, as we adopted agriculture, circa around 10,000 years ago through much of the world, and in some places even more recently than that, we gained some capacity to deal with that, but it's still a relatively new adaptation, and we're still adapting. Certainly, I think, particularly in tropical regions, particularly like where your part of the world is now, certainly, maybe during the ice ages for most of Homo sapien development, it was probably a little different climate and different. Clearly, it was different climates and different food sources would have been available, but we would have eaten fruits. Clearly, we would have eaten some other plants as we kind of passed through it was available to us. And so I think certain people have greater capacity for other foods. Maybe some people have a greater tolerance to dairy. We see that with lactose deficiencies in certain parts of the world. Something like 2/3 of the population has trouble with dairy. Some people have greater capacity to digest and process different grains. And so I think those things apply, but I think meat is a basic human adaptation. If you look at biochemically what we need as human beings, it's very clear, and it's not controversial at all. We need essential fats, essential proteins, some vitamins, and that is all we require. We don't need carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are not a required item. Now, you can certainly utilize them, and many people do well and are fine with that. But to say they are absolutely essential, I can tell you as someone who has not had fiber in almost 4 years, has not had any real significant carbohydrate in almost the same period of time, I'm thriving, and as are tens upon tens of thousands of people now that have been doing this, some up to 2 decades or more. And so I think over time, as if you come from a strict vegetarian or even fully plant-based diet, you will struggle initially with the transition. But there are people that given enough time, they seem to regain that capacity. So it's just a matter of time for many people. But it is obviously, if you're coming from a place where vegetarianism is very common and popular, it will be probably a little more challenging than someone who's in a different situation.
Okay, thank you. And so when it comes to dieting, for example, if somebody wants to lose fat versus somebody wants to gain muscle mass on the carnivore diet, do calories still count? Do we still have a caloric deficit that's important during a carnivore diet, or how does it go?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, calories certainly count. Now, some of the things we see is, just because a carnivore diet tends to be a higher protein diet, we know that the thermic effect of protein gives us a little bit of an advantage. And so we can eat a little bit more if it's protein. We know that's not even controversial. There is some evidence out there, and this is very controversial, that diets that are low in carbohydrates or even completely devoid of carbohydrates might also give you a slight metabolic advantage. And again, that's a very controversial statement, but the protein statement isn't at all. Having said that, you still are going to reach a ceiling at some point where if you continue to eat beyond that, you're going to gain weight. And conversely, if you eat below, you're going to lose weight. And so often there's different approaches. If you want to put on muscle, for instance, eating higher protein, eating more protein, eating in a little bit of a caloric surplus is what's going to happen. And of course, you've got to do the requisite training, the strength training, the resistance training to do that. Conversely, if you want to get leaner and lose body fat, there's 2 ways to do that really in a carnivore. Some people like to go the very lean protein route where they'll eat relatively low fat, higher protein, and that seems to work pretty effectively for many people. Some people find that they have too many cravings and they're not satisfied appetite-wise, and so they end up kind of having these binges, and that doesn't help them. Other people find a very high fat approach to be very satiating, and they find they don't want to eat very much, and so they end up going into caloric deficit in that particular way. And so there's different strategies. Some people find that the higher fat approach is more palatable, it's more satiating, they enjoy it better, they feel better. Other people do better on the higher protein approach. So either way can work, but again, I think clearly a caloric deficit is at play. We can't just say calories don't count at all. Now they do. Different food substances affect our hormone system, our immune system, our general health. Absolutely. So the quality of food still is a huge component of this, and but both things are relevant.
Okay. And now let's talk about vitamin supplements, mineral supplements, and fiber intake. So there's a lot of controversy that if a person eats a lot of meat and less carbohydrate, then they have less fiber in their food, and they might miss out on some vitamins that are available in plants, like phytonutrients or something like that. So do you consume any supplements like that, and how do you compensate for the fiber?
Yeah, so let me just, I guess I'll address the vitamin one first of all. And again, we talked about what the human requirements are, again, protein, fat, and so probably the biggest sort of glaring deficiency of a carnivore diet for most people would say would be vitamin C. We can get pretty much almost all of the other ones, through meat. And in fact, you can construct a carnivore diet to make you hit the US RDA on pretty much all the vitamins. Assuming you're willing to eat seafood and dairy and organ meats, you can certainly clearly do that, and that's doable. However, most people don't do that. Most people, on paper, if they're pursuing a carnivore diet, you would say, you know, there's a deficiency in vitamin C. What we're not seeing is anybody with any significant clinical signs or symptoms of vitamin C deficiency, certainly not overt and probably not even subclinical. One of the things we do know is that the way the recommended daily allowances were determined was based on populations eating a 50-60% carbohydrate-based diet, eating high amounts of grains. And we do know that many of the plants, while they have vitamins and minerals in them, also have things called anti-nutrients, which actually block the absorption of those very same vitamins and minerals. For instance, phytates or phytic acid will bind up with things like magnesium, with iron, calcium, zinc, some of these other minerals that you would otherwise absorb. And so when you don't have the phytic acid in your diet, these minerals are more readily absorbed. In fact, the RDA has recently changed to say that if you're eating a lot of phytates, which would be things in legumes, beans, and grains, you actually need to eat more zinc. If you eat 1,000 milligrams of phytic acid, you need to double your zinc consumption. And if you eat 2,000 milligrams of phytic acid, you need to triple your zinc consumption. Vitamin C, there's a lot of things that are potentially going on with vitamin C that being on a carnivore diet probably lessens that requirement. You know, we know that there are several glucose transporters which also uptake vitamin C. So there's this competitive inhibition. So if you have a lot of glucose, vitamin C can't get through because the glucose is all going through. So that happens in the gut. It happens across mitochondrial membranes. It happens in another place. We also know that carnitine, which is one of the very important functions of vitamin C. When you're eating a meat-based diet, particularly a red meat-based diet, you're getting lots and lots of carnitine. So you may bypass some of the need for vitamin C. We also know the red blood cell can recycle vitamin C. And so we see all these things where we're not, potentially, needing as much in the diet. And there is vitamin C in meat, including things like steak, which was not tested by the USDA, and other independent labs have verified that there is a small amount of vitamin C there. The same thing with like folate is another one that might potentially be low. Certainly if you eat liver, you can clearly get your folate needs. But even if you don't, we see that bacteria in our gut will produce folate, and those bacteria that produce folate tend to be upregulated or increase in populations in low carbohydrate diets. And so there's compensatory mechanisms that seem to be at play here. And again, I'm not seeing these deficiencies pan out. Now, let's say you did have something, you could certainly take the supplement if you needed to, and I wouldn't discourage you from doing that. But it's not been a need that's been demonstrated at this point. Again, this is a relatively new diet, and we're still learning about it. But in general, there are people that have been doing this for many years, even several decades, without needing to take any supplements. Now, with regard to fiber, I haven't had fiber in my diet in 4 years now, almost 3 or 4 years. I'm not dead. I'm clearly doing well. I mean, if you can follow me on social media, you can see I'm performing at a very high level despite being in my 50s. Interestingly, a lot of belief around fiber is it's essential for a healthy gut biome, and there's really mostly speculative evidence. We don't really know what a healthy gut biome is, as much as people try to claim that they do. The research on that is so far in its infancy that to make these proclamations or be prescriptive about what you need for a healthy gut microbiome is just, it's way too premature. We've seen that, populations, particularly, like polar populations that don't have access to much fiber in their diet, they exhibit very good gut diversity. One of the things one of the concerns people talk about is without fiber, you won't be able to maintain a healthy gut lining. The bacteria will sort of destroy that lining. And, some of the short chain fatty acids, such as butyrate, which is produced by gut bacteria when they interact with fiber, is something you won't be able to receive. But that's clearly also not the case. We see that things like proteins, amino acids, can also elicit short chain fatty acids, things like methylbutyrate, propionate, acetate. We also know that as you go on a low carbohydrate diet, particularly when ketones are produced, the principal ketone in the body is beta hydroxybutyrate. It sounds a lot like butyrate because it's just one hydroxyl, an OH molecule away from becoming butyrate, and that's a very highly reversible reaction. In fact, some of the thoughts is that the butyrate that is actually protecting the gut is actually converted into beta-hydroxybutyrate, and that is actually the protective function. So if you're already making beta-hydroxybutyrate from a low-carb diet, you're getting that same benefit there. So you don't need the fiber in the diet to get the short-chain fatty acids. You're making them already. And so, and again, what I see very frequently is people suffering from inflammatory bowel disease, whether it's Crohn's disease or colitis or irritable bowel syndrome, which is a very diagnosis in the United States, with 15 to 20% of the population being affected and more all the time. Those people see their gut health improve dramatically by going on a carnivore diet. So in fact, fiber in many cases is actually irritative to a lot of people's guts. And a lot of people don't even know they have gut dysfunction. They just assume their digestion, which is, you know, sometimes bloating, sometimes gas, sometimes, you know, urgency and diarrhea and constipation is kind of the normal situation. I can tell you, and we've looked at people on this diet, and I studied 100 people that did it for 90 days, and they had pretty much a bowel movement once a day with no difficulty, no constipation, no problems with gas, bloating, or swelling. And so gut health tends to be very, very good on a carnivore diet, despite what the people that want to sort of encourage you to do a plant-based diet try to tell you, but it's not been the case at all.
Okay. And since we're talking about supplements, are you also consuming any whey protein, or is the carnivore diet enough to suffice your protein intake per day?
Yeah, I don't see any reason to be on a carnivore diet and need to supplement protein. I mean, you should be able to get plenty of protein from an animal-based diet. I mean, this is, you know, the average, and I don't know what the Indian diet protein level is, but in the United States, the average, depending on which study, is about 12 to 16% of our diet comes from protein, or dietary calories come from protein. A carnivore diet, just for most people, without any difficulty at all, tend to get about 30% of the calories from protein, which probably, if we look at, you know, most of these hunter-gatherer populations, that's pretty much along the lines of what they tend to get, somewhere in that neighborhood. I think in our evolutionary past, it's probably pretty much consistent with how we evolved a little bit higher protein approach, and clear, you know, and almost many, if not most, studies indicate that a high protein diet is always better for body composition, maintaining lean muscle mass, you know, maintaining less fat on the diet. So protein is clearly a positive thing. I think most people don't get enough, but the need to supplement with whey protein, if you're eating a mostly meat-based diet, is probably just completely superfluous.
Okay. And Dr. Baker, where can we find your content, and what services do you provide online and in person?
So, you know, obviously meatrx.com is a platform that myself and my partner have constructed, which is just a huge resource, probably the largest resource in the world. We've got, you know, literally hundreds upon hundreds of success stories of every category, categorized by, you know, different ailments: diabetes, heart disease, you know, anxiety, depression, autoimmune disease, thyroid disease, reproductive health, women's health, so on and so forth. We have a meeting every single day. I'm in there doing a live Zoom video chat meeting every day, 7 days of the week, 9 a.m. Pacific time. In fact, right after this, I'll be doing one. So that's where you can find me every single day. If you want to talk and interact with me and ask me questions on video, I'm here to do that and support folks. We have all kinds of meetings throughout the day, you know, literally dozens and dozens of meetings throughout the week for people that can join from all over the world, 24 hours a day. We have, you know, recipes. We have 8,000 plus research articles. If you're looking at the science behind some of the stuff and you're concerned about, does high protein affect my kidneys? Does saturated fat cause heart disease? We've got all the research that's out there are pretty much compiled and categorized. We have a coaching service that is extremely affordable. We've got people from all over. We have, again, several folks from your part of the world that join us every day in our meetings that are there to support folks. You know, I have a YouTube channel where I put up some stuff. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's science, sometimes kind of trying to sort of correct some of the vegan propaganda that's out there. I'm on Instagram, Shawn, SHAWN Baker, 1967 where we're at right now. I've got it
Yeah.
on Twitter at SBakerMD. And then I do, I also do some online consultations, a couple hours a day, every day, well, Monday through Friday. That can be done through, you can go to the link in my bio on Instagram. There's shawn-baker.com, which is my website where it has that. I consult with people from all over the world and all kinds of issues. I mean, a lot of high-level professional athletes as well, but that is kind of where I'm found and what I can, what we do.
Awesome. And where can we find your book, an online version or in-person version?
Well, Amazon.com has it, so it's
Okay.
a carnivore diet and Shawn Baker MD. If you look at those things, you'll see that. I think there's Book Depository. It's been a place for international stuff. It is available both in digital format and in paperback. I think hopefully an audio version will be coming out. I know the publisher agreed to do that. We haven't done that yet. I think some of this sort of pandemic stuff has kind of put a damper on some of the stuff, but that's where you can get the book.
Okay. Well, Dr. Baker, thank you so much for taking the time and joining me here. I'm sure the audience has learned a lot from you. I'll be sharing this on IGTV, and later on I'll be posting it on YouTube as well. And yes, thank you so much.
Been my
I
pleasure.
hope you keep safe during this pandemic.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.